Contrary to popular belief, ethanol-based fuels may actually be more harmful to the environment than gasoline. Ethanol fuels alone burns just a fraction cleaner than gasoline and petroleum-based fuels. With this fact in mind, a much overlooked fact about corn-based ethanol fuels is how they are actually manufactured, and the long and short-term consequences of this manufacturing process. Most of us come into contact with corn-based ethanol fuels every time we come up to the pump. Almost all American grades of gasoline have some amount of ethanol fuel in it, to include E85 ethanol, which is 100% ethanol fuel. Without a second thought, a plant-based fuel would appear to be the green wave of the future. As demand for corn increases, researchers are starting to observe the effect of corn-based ethanol fuels on our water supply, and how this is harming the environment as a whole. One study published by the Journal of Environmental Science and Technology states that E85 generates approximately 6 to 108% greater impact on the environment than compared to gasoline. The reason for such a large gap has solely to do with the fact that how corn is cultivated and where it's cultivated. Corn production requires an intensive amount of irrigation. The average acre of corn requires about 550,000 gallons of water to produce. Taking this into consideration, this destructive water use can be seen in places like Texas, where much of the state has been in a drought since 2010. But the water shortage doesn't stop in America. Less than 2 years ago, the entire Horn of Africa suffered its worst drought in 60 years, leaving more than 13 million people starving from famine. Aside from creating extreme water shortages, the cultivation of corn for use in ethanol fuels greatly contributes to an environmentally destructive process known as eutrophication. Eutrophication is defined as a process by which a body of water acquires a high concentration of nutrients like phosphates and nitrates. When these nutrients are introduced into the water system, the growth of oxygen-depleting algae increases. With oxygen being stolen from the water supply, living organisms like fish die, creating harmful greenhouse gases. Eutrophication produces very unhealthy water ecosystems and eventually dries up the entire water supply. This increased production of corn-based ethanol fuels is leaving an enormous negative footprint on our water supply and contributing to an international environmental crisis. Many other environmentally damaging factors besides water consumption play into why corn-based ethanol fuels are harmful to the environment. A much ignored fact when considering the production of ethanol is how much fossil fuel it takes to harvest the corn. A recent study done by the EPA titled Farming in the Lone Star State states that in 2005, 20 million gallons of petroleum-based fuels were used in the cultivation of corn. Multiply these numbers nationwide, and we begin to see how the procuring of ethanol is actually more harmful than we've previously taken into consideration. A study done by the USDA titled NASS Prospective Planting Report provides us with evidence that more corn is being demanded in America. In the year 2009, only 79.6 million acres of corn were planted in America, but in 2007, 93.5 million acres were planted. This leaves us asking, where do we put the extra 14 million acres? Ecosystems like wetlands and grasslands, which have been helping us combat global warming, have to be cleared in order to make way for these farms. According to an article published by the Environmental Working Group, we have lost more wetlands and grasslands in the last 4 years than the previous 40. With no specific guidelines on how to cultivate corn, farmers and companies are often using outdated and environmentally unfriendly equipment and techniques to harvest their crops. With all of these factors playing into the equation, it's hard to see why ethanol-based fuels could be green in any way. So how is corn-based fuel made affordable? Through government subsidies. The EWG Farm Subsidy Group states from 1995 till 2012, the government has provided the corn industry in America with $84.4 billion in subsidies. Without these subsidies, corn-based ethanol fuel would be too expensive and impractical to be a viable energy solution in any economic system. Many of you may be thinking, unlike petroleum, at least corn is a sustainable resource. In no way am I advocating that petroleum is the best solution to our energy needs. I am only using it to prove how damaging ethanol fuels are. A more environmentally friendly energy source that is also sustainable, such as solar power or wind power, is a better solution. As our society becomes more and more aware of the global environmental crisis, it's hard to see how a solution like ethanol fuel would be appetizing. I propose to make your voice heard. Write to your senator and congressman. Ask them not to support any legislation that would support a subsidy of corn industry in America. As an educated public, we must all take a step back and look at the total impact of a potential environmental solution before we start to invest in them.